Now, if I'm going to take the same approach in D3 and instead of map through a p tags in HTML, and I'm going to map through a rectangle, we can actually create our first chart. To do that, I'm going to be using class component instead of function component, just so you can see the difference. So open up the README file and let's use the D3 class template with generate React CLI. So we have a starting point, and let's call this chart simple chart. And that's going to create us again the 3 files, but this time it's a class type instead of function component. What we're going to do is we're going to set it up at the entry point, app.tsx, just like we did before. So let's create simple chart. There you go. Clean up the old import. And here, again, we've done this before. And we're going to use the reference. We're going to use everything in here. So let's start from the beginning. If you recall, if we want to create our chart, we need to go through this checklist. We need to get the data, set the data, process the data, and then integrate to React Lifecycle hooks, draw the chart. So we're going to do all of that, install the chart, right? So the first step we need to do is we need to deal with the data. Before we pass the data, but we can actually handle that here because we're not really loading that data from anywhere at this point. So if we set a data variable, and then what we can do is after we set the reference, we can also set the data and pass some values. Let's say I'm going to pass static values. And now when the component mount, let's delete all of that. And we're just going to call, we're going to create a function, we're going to call it draw chart. I'm going to call that. And in draw charts, just so it's similar to the way we did it with function component, we're gonna draw our charts. Okay, so here we got, and once the component is gonna mount, we need to enter this method. We're gonna call the draw charts, and inside the draw charts, we're gonna set a few things up. First of all, we're gonna set the size of the bars that we're going to be creating. So we're going to create a rectangle that is going to look like bars. So we want to set that variable of the size. Then the next thing is we can create an SVG variable, and we're going to again use the D3 select. Then we can pass the reference .current, and we have it already set up. It's linked to the simple chart class name with the div, so it's already attached here. And then the next step is once we selected, what we can do is we can set the data. No, wait, before we set the data, we need to, we have the SVG. Okay, let's do this. Let's break the chaining so you'll see the difference. So if we do SVG that select all, and we're going to select all the rectangle that's going to get created for us, and now we can set the data with our data array that we set with those numbers, and now we can set all the attributes. So we need to set few attributes. We need to, when it comes to rectangle, we need to set the X, the Y, the width, and the height. So the X, we can use inline function and take the data and take the index. And then what we can do is we can set, we can multiply by 5 the index, which will be increment, and then multiply the index with the 5 for the space. So we'll have space between those bars. And now we can put the rectangle width. So a good idea is to put that in a separate constant. So let's create a constant. Let's call it rectangle width, so we can use that, and it's going to be easy to change. Let's set it to 95. I know that that's going to work. So it's 95 pixel. So if we're going to multiply the index with the width of each bar and then add 5 for the space, that's going to be our x value, right? Now for the y value, what we can do is we can do something similar. We can use again the d inline fat function, fat arrow function, and then we can just set the size. This is the size of our chart, 500, and we can reduce the d, which is the size of one of the data element. This way we'll see the bars increasing, being set one after the other. And then we need to put an attribute for the width. I had a typo. For the width, we set the rectangle width as a variable that we can use, and we need to do the same for the height. And what we can do is just set the height to the size of the data that we're passing. Then the last thing we need to do is we just need to set some kind of fill, otherwise it's going to be black. So let's do the fill, and again we can use that tomato fill we had before, and that's about it. The only thing that we have left to do is let's get rid of that rectangle that we have inside. We don't need that. So we can close the div because it's just one line. Again, we don't need the bracket. And let's see if we get any errors. Okay, let's take a look at this again. Let's see what's happening. So first, we have the SVG, and we're selecting the rectangle. Then we have the data. Then we need to add an enter. So only once it's going to enter to the DOM, we're going to loop through. Once it's going to loop through, we're going to set all those properties. And let's take a look at the property. We got 5, so it's going to add space between them, and then the rectangle. And each one of them, we should add another 5. So it's going to space them out neatly. Then the next thing is then it's setting the properties. I'm not appending. We need to append a rectangle. So we're all good. The only other things we have on the SVG tag, we need to append an SVG because we don't have an SVG there. So let's append an SVG, and then we can set the attributes, the width and the height. So let's set the width. Oops. We're going to set the width to the size of our container, on our div container, and we're going to do the same for the height. We'll set it to the height of the div container. We'll set both of them to 500 that we set here, and that should do it. Let's take a look. Here we go. We want some spacing. We have a problem in the spacing. Let's take a look what's happening. Yeah, what's happening, if we look at the X, the spacing, the multiply is going to go, the +5 needs to go in a bracket. So what we're going to do, we're going to space the rectangle, and then we can space 5 is going to be the space between them. And after it adds, then we're going to multiply it by the index, and then we're going to add another 5. So that should do it. Here we go.